Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you being here. Looking forward to a fantastic discussion with myself and Paul. So quick introduction. My name is Michael Berger with Capgemini Government Solutions. I lead our defense, aerospace, and intel market here. And really excited to have this conversation with you, Paul.
Sweet. Me too. So I'm Paul Puckett, the director of the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency. I'm a field operating agency that reports to the CIO of the Army, so kind of an interesting organizational construct there. And we're essentially charged with driving both cloud strategy as well as the execution of leveraging cloud computing to fundamentally change the way we do business at the Army.
Yeah, and so, I want to level set with folks on what we want to impart and leave with you today. I think there's a couple things that we want to leave you with. Number one, what we're going to be talking about today is we're enabling outcomes with cloud computing. So what are we able to do? What is the Army able to do with cloud computing to support the mission? But more importantly, this is all about cloud services. You need a solid foundation of cloud services that people love to have a chance of success at digital transformation in your organization. So what does that mean? How does that look for the Army? What does that mean for DoD writ large? So it's an important conversation that I think we're going to tackle today. I think we've got a lot to say.
We do. We do.
So Paul, let me start with a couple of foundational documents to the Army that are really important to this discussion. So in 2019, the Army came out with the Army Modernization Strategy. And in that, there's a quote that says, "Cloud is the foundation for this entire modernization effort. The Army will develop a cloud computing technology that improves data access and sharing environments." Mm-hmm. So foundationally, 2019. Mm-hmm. Fast forward to 2021, we've got the Army Digital Transformation Strategy. And this is all around three big domains, or three big pillars. One objective of ADTS is modernization and readiness. Mm-hmm. Second pillar is reform. And the third one is people and partnerships. And so, I think I wanted to put that on the table foundationally to talk about where the Army has been as it relates to these modernization strategies and efforts. And really, I think I want to start with, recap the ECMA story, ECMA story,
yeah.
As it relates to those strategies.
Yeah. So shaping this out this way is really important, we think, because a lot has happened in 2.5 years in the United States Army. But that's really much bigger than the ECMO or the ECMA. But there's a role that we've played since we were created at the end of 2019 that really was built off of that one line in the Army Modernization Strategy. And that's about as deep as the rabbit hole went from a strategy perspective, because if you think about it and just kind of take a pause and a step back, the Army to carve what at the time was $750 million over the course of a FIDEP and create an office in the then CIO G6 and then charter it in a way that poked at more than just the policy and governance role of the CIO G6 at the time. You've got to take a moment and pause and be like, why did that happen? Because that's not normal. And so when the ECMO was created back in November, we emerged into this world of resources and this kind of weird loose charter of driving cloud adoption for the Army. But we had to understand our place in the world. And so right before we came online, the Data and Cloud Execution Order was released by the Army and essentially said, hey, we are going to see ourselves, we're going to understand our systems, our services, and our data because we need to unlock the value of our data as a strategic asset, and we're going to leverage the cloud as essentially our modernization strategy to deliver value on that data. And so immediately the entire mechanism of the Army was like, we're going to move, and this is on the heels of the Army Modernization Strategy. But historically, prior to the ECMO, there were a number of initiatives trying to adopt the cloud that all essentially seemed to fail, or at the very least seemed to fail in a way where it was repeatable and scalable for the rest of the Army. And that's not to say that there weren't initiatives or capabilities hosted in the cloud, but truly democratizing access to cloud services to transform the business of the Army had not been achieved. And so the strategy that was handed to us at the time was ECMO is a temporary thing. We're going to go all in the cloud. It's going to take us 3 years. And at the end of those 3 years, the ECMO is going to disappear. And in my first meeting with the secretary, I was like, that's not how this works, man. Because that treats it, you've heard me say this before publicly, it just treats it as like another data center, like a different hosting environment. But this goes much deeper than that. And so we shifted the strategy and said, no, there's a few things that we need to do here. We need to create a structure for buying cloud services. That's important. We need to create a structure for securing access to a cloud environment. And we need to enable the building of capabilities that actually modernize the Army. And I pitched that kind of center thing, that securing capability, and saying we need to deliver the common services of the cloud. We need to deliver the common data services to actually enable us to get after our data, and the common services and tools to get after software development. And in one of my initial discussions with people, they're like, hey, welcome to the Army. What's your big, quick win? And I said, we're going to deliver cloud common services that the Army loves to use as a service. And they said, no, you aren't. Like, there's no way that the Army will ever adopt that. And so, no, that's what we're going to do. And then the mechanism to leverage those services to scale. And so that was our hypothesis at the start, is if we deliver that capability, we could actually see outcomes for the Army that were seen as repeatable. And so I pitched this strategy in February 2020, partnered with AAG, Army Analytics Group. And then I pitched an idea for a first customer to the Office of Business Transformation, Mr. Robin Swan. And at the time, the ERPs were trying to shut down out of data centers and move into the cloud. And I said, you can accelerate your timelines if you use these common services. And sure enough, they moved their timeline to the left about 3 months. We had nearly $10 million in cost avoidance for moving to the cloud. And they were able to start what really began as their optimization and modernization of the business systems in the cloud. And that kind of put the hypothesis on the map. And then we were charged to do it again and again and again to show that it's not a fluke. And so that's really where we were for all of 20. Standing up a team and building partnerships during a global pandemic was interesting. But then really into 21, we started to grow the outcomes and the different capabilities. Earlier today, you heard some of the teams from 18th Airborne Corps talking about Project Ridgeway. And so we started to show that it wasn't just for enterprise systems or business systems. It wasn't just for these CONUS. We can start to tease on the edges of really any mission capability for the Army. So now we find ourselves kind of end of 21 into 22. So 21, the digital transformation strategy comes out. And that hypothesis was proven to be valid. Like, there's value here, but now we need to truly take this to scale. And so what you see codified when you read the Army digital transformation strategy is you see this notion of cloud services and its value for the Army, a valid hypothesis that's been proven. Now the outcomes need to grow, which means that the digital infrastructure needs to become way more mature. The capabilities really need to expand, and the customer experience really needs to be built. And all of the LOEs that you see for modernization readiness, for reform, and for people in partnerships are really underpinned by the need of that digital infrastructure of the cloud. And so in that kind of transition, the ECMO became the ECMA. So we're no longer an office or directorate of the CIO G6. We became a field operating agency reporting to the CIO. And what that really created for us was room to deliver services. Typically, policy, governance, charter kind of matters in the Army. And so that actually turned us into an execution agency. And so we see this kind of major growth in just 2.5 years of the Army, from a hypothesis to validated, and now let's grow it. And so that's what you see, that transition between the two is now cloud is more than just a one-liner, right? And the modernization strategy, it now is read as really the underpinning of the Army's digital transformation strategy.
Yeah, and how do you see the Army Cloud Plan playing into this fold as well?
So when we drafted the Army Cloud Plan of 2020, and this underpins something that we're going to get to today. When I first started, I was actually handed a draft of the Army Cloud Plan. And the first paragraph literally said, due to inconsistent interpretation of senior leader guidance, we've been unable to achieve X, Y, or Z, blah, blah, blah in the cloud. And I was like, your first pitch is going to be to blame your customer. So I was on an airplane flight, and I just murdered it with a red pen. So we wrote a new cloud plan, our cloud plan of 2020. It essentially captured the hypothesis. It dove a little bit deeper than that, but you've got to imagine in the Army putting out that cloud plan, and I think it ultimately got published in May of 2020. It was still this kind of fun idea that people couldn't wrap their hands around. So you kind of see this loose kind of opportunity to learn, very enterprise heavy, kind of pokes a little bit at the tactical domain. But really, we've demonstrated the outcomes of that cloud plan over the last 2 years. But now we're in a growing moment. So we have a new cloud plan for 2020 that tighter aligns now to the digital transformation strategy. That's going through staffing, but it'll soon come out public. What you're going to see is a greater level of detail and maturity for not just leveraging commercial cloud computing, but really how this starts to extend into our on-premise locations, how this starts to extend into our tactical locations, and how we start to kind of poke at some of the mission-enabling capabilities of how the Army operates, enabled by cloud computing. And so that cloud plan of 2022, you'll see, is really a direct complement of the execution, right, plan, resourced, and actually this is what we're going to do that aligns to the greater strategy of the ADTS.
Yeah, and full circle, I mean, so the Capgemini partnership is the fruition of that kind of hypothesis.
Exactly. So we're now at that stage of maturity. So recently we let an award that said, really, we need to take Sea Army to the next level. Because today we've kind of a potpourri of contracts and partnerships, but we need to, this is that maturity moment for us. Because we've proven the hypothesis of the capability, but now if we're truly going to scale this at the Army, the foundation has to be solid from a customer experience perspective, from a mission outcomes perspective. And so we led a new acquisition that led into now our partnership with a predominantly commercial company leaning into this. So I think it would be really important as we talk for you to kind of unpack the way that you see the mission that you're being charged with.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously exciting to support the mission of the Army. When you think of Capgemini and Capgemini cloud capabilities, you're right. We're heavily, from a past performance and from an experience, heavily commercial. You know, over 5,000 of our cloud projects are supporting, Fortune 100 companies. And when we looked at the challenge that ECMA presented, we said, look, we are a non-traditional defense player. We have a small footprint, but what we do have is processes, people, and expertise on how to deploy a shared services model in a multi-tenant cloud environment. And so, the reach back to the commercial cloud team was a very important part of our strategy, which is, for a Fortune 100 company that has a similar challenge, we've delivered that at scale. And so, our goal is obviously to deliver at the speed of innovation. So how do we come in, support? This is all about the user experience. This is all about cloud adoption. So if the customer, your customer, looks at this process and it's seamless, it's easy, it's repeatable, it's automated, that is going to increase cloud adoption. And so our singular focus is to really establish that governance, that infrastructure, that architecture that allows your customers to easily onboard to Sea Army. Yeah.
So like the unpacking for this, because the term common services is said a number of different times. And sometimes we've got to nuance. So we're not talking about like the marketplace offering of the CSPs or of Amazon. Like those services already exist. But in the highly regulated industry of the DoD, there's a certain number of thou shalts that exist before we can even use commercial services. And if we hop in the Wayback Machine, I'd written an article when the DoD cloud computing strategy first came out, and I said, you're missing the most critical piece, because it was centralized on kind of buying, and this is the thing that begot kind of what was originally intended as JEDI. And I said, you're missing the layer on top, because the secure cloud computing architecture, the pieces that actually establish the domain and the monitoring and the security and the services of where we're going to actually host capabilities, like the actual systems running, no one's in that business. And further, no one's been resourced to be in that business for the DoD, so everyone's going to have to solve it themselves. And even deeper than that, no one has the trust or the confidence of the DoD to actually deliver it in a way that'll meet the mission needs. And so this is what we captured and said, well, this is really what our charge is delivering services people love. And part of the reason why this partnership exists is because now taking it to that next level in the commercial world, if people don't like services, they use somebody else's services. And that's what we had to tap into.
Yeah, and I recall our very first conversation, and it was, this is really important. We've got to get this right. Like, this is, the Army has, 2 priorities that we cannot get wrong, and this is one of them. And I think I totally understand that it's about the customer experience. If your customers have a seamless, easy approach to onboarding, they're able to focus on the mission, focus on things that support outcomes. And so, it's how do we support onboarding, support automation, support cloud adoption, and I think that resonated with our team, with the importance of the mission, because it'll allow the end user to focus on what's really important.
Exactly, and that's, like if you look into the ADTS again, modernization, readiness, reform, and people in partnerships, you'll see cloud services really underpins all 3 of those things. And part of the charge that we've had is we want to remove toil from our customers. It says, hey, like the environment, the digital infrastructure, it's set. It's designed to support your mission when and where you need it. The common services of the domain of the Army, authentication, monitoring, all the different pieces needed for an initial, like system to run, like network time protocol, like all the different hooks that you need to function as part of an ecosystem has already been addressed. What we're really doing is we are lowering the barrier to entry to adopt cloud services so that customers can focus on the mission objective and the outcome that they're trying to achieve. And this is the cultural piece that we've been talking about, is, and why we say it has to be something that people love, and I don't think people understand this, is if you are directing the DoD to fundamentally change the way they do business, where this is not modernization, this is legit transformation. So how we function and operate is changing. If you ask them to do that and then also give them common cloud shared services that they hate, right? Then they're going to spend all of their time trying to troubleshoot and figure this thing out, or quit and do it themselves. And they're going to spend resources and time and people just delivering another foundation, and then you're going to get a copy and paste of the mission objective and outcome that we've always had, because we don't have time to get after it. And I think part of the reason you've seen the growth in the Army is because we just want to remove that toil. And if we're delivering services that they love, they can actually focus on the capabilities beyond. And I think that's really what, like when you've read the ADTS, and as we've chatted about this, is that's really kind of the big thing that you're trying to draw after, is like, how are we actually truly enabling the digital transformation and the layers above? Yeah,
but you touched on culture. I mean, I think, people drive success. I mean, technology enables, okay, technology is there. But really, can you talk about, like, dig a level deeper on the cultural change and the cultural shift, the mentality that has to permeate through the Army to really get after cloud adoption, because it's not a technology solution. It's a people solution.
Yeah, and that's really the point of this chat is, if you don't have that foundation of common services that people love using, you're never going to get to this discussion, which is really where the actual challenge lives. When we get into these discussions, people talk about culture change and all these different pieces, but I think oftentimes they never get to demonstrating different outcomes because they don't address some of these foundational pieces. And so for the people challenge, like Pushpa's in the room, Pushpa leads our cloud enablement division. And what Pushpa and her team sees is the widest spectrum of organizations and system owners that are all the way from, this is a brand new acquisition, it's designed cloud native, containers and microservices up the wazoo, fundamentally changing the way we do business, all the way to people that say, I don't even know why I'm here, but I'm being told to go to the cloud. Tell me what I'm supposed to do. And normalizing and right-sizing that from what are you trying to do? What is your outcome? Which sometimes there's a lot of coaching in that, all the way to all the data collection to actually create structure and confidence and drive the probability of actually getting successful outcome in the cloud. That for us is a people challenge. And it's a cultural challenge as to how we've incentivized, how we've created requirements, and how we deliver capabilities in the Army. And there's layers in that I think people need to take away is, if you aren't investing in that layer of people and what outcome are you trying to achieve, how might we get there, training, contracts, like all the different ways that you need to resource that team, and you just evaluate yourself on just delivering cloud infrastructure, you're not going to have any outcomes. And in the DoD, if you don't have outcomes, right, they shut it down and they try something else. And so if you don't drive after that common services layer, and from how do you extend the domain and enabling capabilities of building in the cloud, you're never going to get to that layer of people and culture change to show different outcomes for the mission in a different way.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, kind of where we sit culturally, culture change perspective, our objective is we want to make it seamless and easy. Mm-hmm. And if it's not, then that culture change becomes more rigid. Mm-hmm. It becomes more difficult. So, and I think this idea that bringing commercial innovation to the table and best practices, we think that, it's at scale to a Fortune 100 company. It's the same challenge. It's just hardened for, no pun intended, for DoD, hardened and hard. And I think that's the fundamental challenge, is making the service seamless, efficient, and automated. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So now for the Army, taking this to scale, there's pieces of what we're trying to do in the Army that I think that you can see resident in other entities of the DoD, that's actually starting to get woven into greater strategy of the DoD. And why that makes me excited is not because the Army played a role in it, but it's because the DoD is now realizing that our ability to accelerate outcomes and deliver new capabilities that really fundamentally change the way we look at requirements, the way we do iterative delivery of services, is when we see the resource investment from a reform perspective, we're actually seeing better return on investment, actual return on investment for how we're investing dollars that's driving higher probability of actually delivering outcomes. And so this undertone of common services, you see it woven, the Air Force with Cloud One is delivering common services for the Air Force. You start to see pieces of it that start to get woven out into the Navy. But this is actually driving a bigger conversation with the DoD, is when we talk about this global strategy for OCONUS Cloud, when we talk about JADC2, someone needs to be in the business of delivering these common services globally. And so we're now seeing how the services can come together, drive interoperability in those common services, so that we can lay that foundation and then allow the DoD to actually focus on what mission, what outcome, what data, what are we actually trying to do. So it's now changing the makeup and organization of the DoD writ large. all because of people realizing there's value in this foundation. And like the Army wasn't first to it. Cloud One, I think, was probably the first to that play in that business. But when we talk about doing this at DoD scale, no one can do it alone. We've got to partner and get after it together. So now in the layers on top, right, that true digital transformation, if you go back to the ADTS and you read the actual lines of the level, the lines of effort, modernization and readiness now gets after how are we leveraging digital technology to enable the business and the organization of the Army and how we function. So there's a few good pieces and evidence to this. The 18th Airborne Corps that presented earlier today was born out of a hypothesis of a captain who was, quite frankly, tired of carrying 3,500 pounds of equipment into the field to exercise. This really was what drove it. And he said, I think I'd just leave some of this stuff at home and just take the delta what I need. And so what that's now become is potential for fundamental reorganization of the talent and the actual personnel that make up FORCECOM, right, when it comes to our corps and divisions, and is actually changing the structure for PEOC 3T and how we write requirements for all tactically fielded systems in the Army. And to step back a year ago, I don't think that there's any world where anyone could have planned that. Here's what the next 5 years looks like and what we're going to do without actually just doing it and trying it and seeing what emerges from it. And so that's really where we need to be focusing our time, is that true digital transformation piece. There's probably a few ways that we can wrap this. We're nowhere close to the extent of time, but what we want to lay is that foundation of common services and partnering with commercial has to change our mindset as to what business we're in, right? And this, how you capture a market capture a market in the DoD delivering services like this is really what in my opinion matters for us to focus on that new world. So if you want to expound just a little, what is that new business? What is that vision for us, right? What does that world look for us in the next 5 years, right? Where do you see this going for the Army and for the DoD writ large?
Yeah, I think like I've said continuously, I think it comes down to we want to make the process as seamless and as easy as possible. Like you said, lower the barrier to entry. We think it's very important for adoption that people are trained properly, have the understanding of what is happening at what scale. So I think that's important. And then it's really driving automation, as it relates to efficiency. So how do we create efficiencies in the system to make it easier for the end user? Because it goes back to we want the end user focused on mission outcomes, focused on what they're doing in the field, versus how difficult it may or may not be to onboard. And so I think it's bringing those commercial practices, the repeatable practices, the shared service knowledge of various companies and in the federal space to the Army. And I think there's a trajectory of the vision of where Sea Army is going. And I 5 years out, I think there's going to be a success story of an easy path to onboarding, an easy path to adoption. And if that means that folks are focusing on the mission, that's a win. And this is not an easy journey though. And the journey is not at the starting line, but we're out the blocks.
It's true.
And I think that there's a lot of things that both of us collectively are doing and can do to work closely together to make sure that that long-term trajectory is solidified. And that's the foundation, and that's based on ADTS, Cloud Plan 2022, and I think those are the fundamental layers of the base, and we just want to build on that.
So 5 years ago, I was at, I'm fairly certain it was 2017, the very first public sector summit that was held in DC. Then I was at National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and so I was running cloudy stuff for them at the time. And the question was, what do you hope happens in the next 5 years? It's now 22. So this is the 5 years. And what I said at the time is, hopefully we're not trying to argue the merits of cloud. Like, that's a given. There's opportunity with cloud. We're talking about how we use it to deliver outcomes. And I think a lot has changed in the last 5 years. Is we're definitely at that second part of the conversation. What I think everyone needs to acknowledge is that if no one's in the business of making the adoption of cloud easier for your organization, everyone's in the business of making it easier for themselves. And that is duplication of effort, duplication of resources, but also the knowledge management and the learning and the growing that happens there only serves those individual stovepipes. But the counter is you could charter someone that's in that business and mandate them as the only way of doing business. And the natural byproduct that you're going to get there as well is people kicking and screaming. So you have to have this mindset of, we're in the business of capturing a market of people that love the services that they use. We've said it from day one. And that mindset is ingrained in every single person that works in our team. Because any win or success is not guaranteed for them. Any win or success is another example of us learning to be better and growing to be better. And so now being in that business, delivering a foundation of services people love, now we can really spend our time which is where the hard work is, which is, what are you trying to do that's fundamentally different, that enhances the way that we fight and win wars? That's where the focus and the resources have to be. Because the challenges around, someone earlier today was like, how are you handling the budgeting issue? I'm like, the PPBE process requires us to predict the future. And March 2020 taught us you can't predict the future. So how do you create space and learning and growing? And that's all the people and the culture change, to the point of onboarding. So I think with that's really the meat and potatoes of what we really wanted to cover today, is make sure you're making that investment, but you're setting the tone for the expectation for how that investment of those common services need to be delivered. And you've really got to lean into people and partnerships to be successful, right? Yeah. I've said publicly, I don't want products, I want partners. And so that's pretty evident in how we think about this challenge that we have in delivering services.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this idea of a culture change it's a beginning. We're here. And now, the task at hand is to make sure that we are successful in that culture change, and we're successful in making it easy for the customer to support the end user. And I think that's what we're here for. So appreciate the partnership.
Absolutely. For everyone, outcomes are the catalyst to culture change. You just have to create a pathway for people to see themselves and their outcome to make it repeatable. So with that, we're open to any questions, and we can go on any layers of this world.
There are microphones.
Yeah, and there are microphones if you guys have any questions.
Hello, Stefan from Germany. So thanks for your talk. So I like the way you described the services clients love. Can you give an example? So what's the services you started with? And how do you convince the first user to really jump on it? Because that's a big challenge for us in Germany. So many clients like to go on cloud, but who's the one doing the first step? So either they are successful or they're being killed because doing wrong.
Sure.
So to start that cultural transformation, so when you have some example, how
Absolutely.
you overcome that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
So the typical lead time to go and build a capability in the cloud and get an authority to operate is somewhere between, when you think about it, about 9 to 12 months. And the reason being is typically you've got some kind of lead time for an acquisition. Someone has to get on contract to actually do the work. You have to also have a contract to create an account with a cloud service provider like Amazon. So there's got to be a vehicle in that place in some way, shape, or form. You've got to build an environment from the ground up. You then have to go through some accreditation and testing of that capability. And that's just to address the secure cloud computing architecture in the DoD. And it's really on the services side for the Army. It's 3 major components. So like our first common services were the primary services of the secure cloud computing architecture, which is the virtual data center security stack, security services, management services, and trusted cloud credential management, which is all about just seeing ingress and egress, seeing what's happening in the environment, managing it, and then the credentialing process for who has the ability to manipulate and change the environment. So we delivered that as a common service. Our first customer, like I said, is the Office of Business Transformation, and they had a problem. And their problem was they were trying to go live, but they needed to build and secure their own environment before they could build their capability. And so what I postured, I said, is you might be able to move your timeline to the left and avoid spending some money, and we'll own the toil and the pain of all the pieces that you need, and you can just inherit what we've done and be a customer, be a tenant, right, in our kind of secure apartment. So our first customer was me posturing, how do we make your life better? And then the value that came at the other end was like, that was actually useful, and it made our lives better. And what everyone has to acknowledge is, people talk about like, everyone hugs their own thing. More often than not, they're hugging their own thing because no one's ever shown or demonstrated that they're willing to do that thing for them and it actually works. So their only option is to do it themselves. So when you demonstrate just like, hey, like I'm in the business of actually delivering you services that you love and it delivers your outcomes, now we're telling from a business of the Army perspective, wait, I'm saving money or avoiding money, or I'm moving my timelines to the left. Like, how often do you hear of programs and initiatives where they're like, all of my timelines are like, no, we hear it the other way. Everything's moving to the right. So we buy down risk, right? And that's really the entry point for the first customer. But then, we can stand ourselves and be like, we're amazing. Like, no, it's not a fluke. Let's do it again. And let's do it again. And let's do it again. And then we can obviously enhance and make our services better. So solve somebody's pain is really what it is. And there's pain there, right? You just have to spend some time to work with them to figure it out. The services have grown, obviously, beyond the SCCA. We talk about more enabling services like, you want to do DevSecOps, right? You might need a source code repository, right? Delivering that as a service. So starting to just add some of those common needs. Big pain point around buying physical government-furnished equipment for privileged, access and administration. Okay, we can solve that with virtual GFE. So we bring that service online, right? Accelerating how quickly people can move in. So it's, and if you look at how we're structured in the ECMA, we own the entire life cycle of cloud services for the Army. So I am that feedback loop, right? We have the ability to receive that feedback and then do something about that feedback. And that turnaround time and how we deliver common services only enhances and grows, right, than the repeatability and the positive experience of customers.
Hi, Brianna Riley. I'm a reporter with Inside Defense. Thanks so much for doing this today. I wanted to jump back to the 2022 cloud computing or cloud plan that you mentioned. What's the timeline for releasing that? And also, can you talk a little bit more about how not only in this plan, but in the immediate couple of years following it, you want to see more leveraging of commercial cloud computing capabilities? Thank you.
Absolutely. So timelines for internal staffing and when things get released. We'll say this, for the original Cloud Plan 2020, I had pitched that would be out in January of 2020, and it ultimately was released in May. So I was off by 4 months. The point being is there's a lot of feedback for people to understand what it actually means before they're like, yeah, this makes sense. We staff it across everyone in the Army. So the right answer is, I don't know. But if it doesn't happen by the end of this fiscal year, someone will probably be chatting with me about that. So you'll see it at the very least September or before. When it comes to the adoption of commercial cloud services, I think that there's important nuance to this. A lot of people want to talk about hybrid, multi. There are all these different kind of patterns for how you can leverage cloud computing. We leaned into commercial cloud services because it actually solves a lot of challenges that exist in the Army, or really the DoD, when it comes to budgeting. A lot of people want to create common services, do all these different things with cloud, and then create rate cards for it. Like, here's how much it costs to use these things. They want to charge all these different things back. But they have to understand that their customers have never used that service before. And trying to get an outcome this year means that 3 years ago, they estimated what those rates were and how much they used. Like, that's not a thing, and that doesn't work. So we had to make it simple and say, let's just use commercial cloud services. There's an established rate. We have discounts on our vehicle that we have called Camo. So that makes it a little easier for people to now see what this world looks like for on-demand computing. As we move into 22 and beyond, naturally our architecture is going to move to the edges of what we see CONUS, which is commercial cloud services, but starting to reach OCONUS. So what that world looks like kind of varies. There's an OCONUS Cloud Working Group in the DoD CIO trying to get after this challenge. The building blocks of JWCC for how we buy cloud infrastructure has some of these pieces for how we create regions globally. But the way that we're leaning in right now to try and understand it is buying some of the hardware as a service offerings that some of the CSPs have and starting to co-locate that at the tactical edge when it comes to processing the data and services that we need to be performant within that region. And so what we're focusing on is leveraging those commercial services and extending the network. There's a major issue in the initiative in the Army called the Unified Network Plan, driven out of the G6, to connect the enterprise and the tactical. And that's a major network modernization initiative. And so that really becomes the backbone for global cloud services leveraging commercial. And then what you're also going to see is really a hybrid of where we can make appropriate investments on-premise in our private data centers that complements the greater initiatives of the DoD around what DISA is doing, where we can start to have more on-demand cloud infrastructure in on-premise locations in both strategic locations, CONUS, as well as OCONUS. So I see commercial growing, and our use of it growing, but I also see some kind of persistent use case for on-premise that really needs to be teased out. But again, back to kind of the why, what are you trying to achieve, what are you trying to do? That's not just to lift and shift from a data center construct to an on-premise cloud construct, but truly how that becomes seen as a strategic asset in a greater global architecture of cloud computing is really important. And so you'll see those partnerships driven with ECMA, G6, Netcom, as well as Altes. Yeah.
Hi, Paul. It's
Hi,
John. I'm coming from US Cyber Command. And the question I have is, do you guys have like a timeline or a time map of like your common services, your basic building blocks, and then when you guys are going to mature to like offering PaaS or platform as a service, and when units can just come in and request, I want to build an app versus I need to build major backend services, right? Like, what does that look like, and is that going to be included inside this documentation?
Yeah, so we actually already have that included in the already existing Cloud Plan 2020, and I can also Cybercom share with you what we have today operationally today, like ready today. So today we operate C-Army common services in both Amazon as well as Azure. We host those services in both unclassified as well as secret regions. And we've got a mix when it comes to just impact level 2 only versus 2, 4, 5, as well as then impact level 6 and secret. And so we've got all the foundation of the SCCA in all of them. But then you'll start to see some of the other enabling capabilities for the actual building of capabilities within the cloud. So to that point, when we talk about PaaS, right, for everyone, platform as a service, within any time you hear platform, say platform for what? So to your question, a platform for hosting applications. We've got 2 different capabilities within Create, which is the Army's initiative around enabling this culture change of DevSecOps in practice between development, security, and IT operations teams. So we've got 2 different platforms from a hosting perspective for applications there. One's called Sorcerer, which is for source code. Like, hey, you just want to be in the business of creating some source code, we can run that source code. Or if you want to be in the business of bringing your own container, right, you can get your own Kubernetes cluster. So Sorcerer, as well as Mayak, manage your own cluster, are 2 different platforms that we have in Create. But when we talk about scaling that, right, all applications kind of look, feel a little bit, things different, especially when you talk about bringing your own container and managing your own cluster. You got to come with a few opinions as to how you tell Kubernetes how to function. Kubernetes that we leverage is really a platform for creating platforms. And so we've got 2 operational platforms today on the unclassified side, and the team's in the midst of extending those services as well as the common tools of software development into secret as well. We hope to have that concluded by the end of this calendar year. But then, like, how do we deliver that as a service? What's the chargeback for it, right? Like, all of those pieces of the business need to be understood. And so it's open to more than just the Army today, but we're still in that, what does that rate card look like? What does the services actually look like? So we'll go live with the rate card for the common tools, right? And then we'll hope to learn more about what hosting looks like in practice. Is that cool? Thanks.
Do you have a landing page?
So the question was, do you have a landing page? So yes, if you go to www.army.mil/ECMA, you can see what's up with the ECMA. That'll actually take you into a link for starting our onboarding process that we have of the actual ECMA portal. But that's our public-facing site. When we say, hey, this is what we got, this is what we're doing, you can learn the basics when it comes to the different pieces of what we have. But that as you go into the portal, you can start to actually see the catalog of services and what that nuance looks like to actually initiate onboarding, to get access to those tools, as well as kind of all the different ways you can hook in with the community that we've created of knowledge and how we share and how we learn to try and upskill the Army when it comes to adopting cloud.
So you said you want your customers to love you, and one of the things in
Not me,
Not-
not me, not me.
The services.
Services.
and the service, they love the services.
services.
Fine. One of the things that they want on services is, I mean, one of the things that people, what have you done for me lately? How do you decide what is the next services that you expand and implement so that so that you can continue that loving relationship over time?
Yeah.
Because if you don't grow, you're going to lose it.
So great question. I love this question. There's a fundamental misunderstanding when it comes to enterprise services, right? Is people think that they can, out of the box, create an enterprise service. And the reality is that if you have an idea that maybe if I deliver this as a service, someone might find value, is you have to quickly get to that first value. And then you have to get a second customer and see what is actually repeatable and reusable between those customers. And you kind of have to design yourself to kind of work your way into delivering something as a service, as an enterprise service. So for instance, with the SCCA, fortunate enough to have some experience of what that starts to look like in practice. So the SCCA pieces are pretty easy. But when you start to talk about delivering different tools or capabilities or like virtual GFE or whatever it might be, there is a bit of a hypothesis as to that actually having value at scale as a reusable service. And so we track for customer demand. Like I said, the virtual GFE came out of a pain point of people, they had all their accounts, but they couldn't start building in the cloud because DoD policy requires, from a privileged access perspective, you come from a managed endpoint to do that. We typically buy laptops, ship them to people to go and do that work. We're like, where are you at in your deployment? Well, I'm not doing anything because I don't have GFE yet, right? Because it was during COVID, right? So like hardware and acquisition, all those different things. So it's understanding, oh, that sounds like pain. Maybe this might help you in that pain. So it's all about the feedback loop of how is the customer experience. And naturally, the try to deliver something as a service is that first attempt to be something that they love. But there are a lot of like virtual GFE or VDI solutions that people do not love, right? So it's making sure that you're creating flexibility in how you deliver that service or capability, right? And so like writing your contracts in a way where you have flexibility to grow in that domain is really critical. Otherwise, it's like, oh, that wasn't the deliverable decided 50 years ago. Exactly. So you've got to create space and room, and that's again, the business that we're in the ECMA is we now have to think of all of our contracts in a way. How do we design our contracts and our team and our people and our processes where like we have a feedback loop that we then can respond to? And we're trying to model ourselves as to what we think are the right practices to deliver software within the DoD, and that's just one of them. Flexibility in contracts to receive feedback and then be able to respond to that feedback. And then the actual money for that and the budgeting for that, I'm now able to make a value, right, discussion with the Army that says, hey, I can, quantify the time lost or the money lost in people waiting and what I pay for these things, but I can also say, I'm able to move timelines to the left, I'm able to solve a problem, and I'm able to do it at scale this way, and I can posture and make an argument for how I need to get money appropriated when it comes to delivering that service. Does that make sense?
So we are at time.
Yeah.
Great discussion. Appreciate your candor and great questions. Any parting words you want to share with the audience in the last 20 seconds? Just put a.
Jeez. Just, I think if anything, the government sees something that looks about right and is very quick to create policy and mandates and all these different things around it. But you really have to come with the carrot, and you have to set the mindset within the team that like our job is to solve problems and make people's lives better and like reduce toil. You've got to embed that in the culture of your people, because then that starts to permeate into the cultures of others. And then you get into the world of, how might we, what could we do together? And that creates room for learning and growth. And any of the successes that we've seen is just more so that culture taking hold, really more so than anything that we've done in the ECMA. But we've got to continue to play a role in being a partner in that ecosystem.
Yeah, good words.
Yeah, brother.
Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate the time. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Nice, bro.